Hello and welcome to the latest in my series of Cambridge iGCSE English Language Exam Top Tips, helping you prepare for the exams coming up in the next few weeks. And today we're looking at tip number 6, which is focusing on how to tackle the longer written responses. So we're talking specifically about the extended response task on paper 1 and the directed writing task on paper 2. And it's important that you're aware of some key differences between these two assessment tasks. I've covered these in detail in my exam clinic webinar, but I've summed up the key features of each of these longer written tasks in today's set of slides. So for paper 1, we have the extended response task, which is worth 25 marks on paper 1. And for this, you may be asked to write a letter, a report, a journal entry, a speech, an interview transcript, or an article. It's based on one passage, which is text C, and you're aiming to identify 5 pieces of information related to each of the 3 bullet points specified in the question, to paraphrasing explicit and implicit ideas to achieve a maximum of 15 marks for content or reading. You want to aim to include some detail and development of ideas as well. And don't forget that there are 10 marks available for quality of writing. So that's effective vocabulary and quality of expression. That's the extended response task. So let's take a look now at the directed writing task on paper 2. This task is worth 40 marks, which is a whopping 25% of your overall grade. Candidates are expected to use, develop, and evaluate information in 2 texts which they're presented with to create a discursive or argumentative and sometimes a persuasive speech, letter, or article. And those are the only 3 text types that you might be asked to write for this task. Your piece should be based on the 2 passages which are presented to you in the insert booklet, and these offer differing or alternative perspectives on the topic under discussion. And you want to explore both the strengths and weaknesses, the arguments, the counter arguments presented in both those texts, evaluating the strengths and weaknesses and considering alternative viewpoints, and sort of considering ways in which you might challenge some of those perspectives also. For example, in the exam clinic webinar, I focused on a past paper task in which students were asked to write a speech based on 2 texts, which were both looking at the various arguments for and against the introduction of a study exchange program in a school. So students were expected to identify and discuss a range of ideas presented in both passages and evaluate, in other words, weigh up and synthesize, which means to blend or combine ideas from both those texts. So a positive aspect, for example, of study exchange visits is that if you see the purpose of education as broader than just achieving, supporting students to achieve excellent grades, you might well see study exchange programs as a good thing, as beneficial for students' education and learning. However, if you only think of education in very narrow terms, in terms of students achieving excellent grades, you might take a different view, an opposing view, that study exchange programs actually take time and energy and resources away from the primary focus of school, which is to help students get excellent grades. So both those different viewpoints were expressed in each of those different passages. So you can see there how it's possible to integrate and sort of present one idea and then counterbalance it with an opposing idea and then reach your own conclusion. So that's a key point of difference between the directed writing task and the extended response task, which is to evaluate ideas, especially if you're aiming for top band marks. You need to consider both the points and the arguments presented in favor of and against the proposal, in this case, to introduce study exchange programs. And you also want to look at ideas which aren't explicitly stated, but are implied or hinted at or suggested, which aren't actually directly mentioned in either text, but you could develop those ideas and take them further to kind of draw those conclusions. So students are expected to sort of weigh up those ideas and think about sort of zooming out and think about these issues in a broader way. But it's very important that we recognize that evaluative points and ideas should be linked to those ideas and arguments presented in the passages. Sometimes students get caught out with this and they think that this is a license when they're invited to present their own views. There's a license to bring in ideas and thoughts of your own based on other material outside of the passages that you've been presented with. But it's really, really important to recognize that the question states to give your own views, but any views expressed must be tethered to or have a basis in the ideas presented in the text. You should not bring in random ideas which aren't rooted in one or either of the passages. And you need to make sure that any points that you make derive from the ideas presented in the passages. And so that's my roundup of the two key longer written tasks on paper 1 and paper 2, and my advice for you on those. I hope you found that helpful. Don't forget that the Cambridge iGCSE English Language Exam Preparation course is still available, which covers all of the key assessment criteria and the skills for success. We go through past paper assessment tasks. We have walkthroughs on all the different kinds of tasks you might be asked to write for the exam. And I include lots of exemplars to illustrate strong responses, so you have a clear idea of what examiners are looking for and how to produce effective responses, with heaps of advice, guidance, and tips to support you to achieving the grade you're aiming for. I'll see you again soon.